Mission Possible, where we explore the frontiers beyond individual scale. I'm Braithwaite, a systems navigator, and I'm fascinated by the potential hiding within our systems. Unleashing that potential is the secret, I believe, to tackling our biggest challenges that are too vast for any solo hero to take on alone. Each week, I'm speaking with visionaries who've discovered that our greatest resource doesn't lie in individual brilliance, rather, it's the incredible capacity that exists between us all. Join us as we discover how to tap that potential by working beyond boundaries, beyond individual scale. This season, we're focused on the natural hazard sector, and living in New Zealand, it's a sector dear to my heart. After all, this is one of the most hazard-prone countries on the planet.
In today's episode, I'm speaking with Livia Hollins, an international public servant with 20 years plus experience of advancing international efforts on climate and sustainable development. I was delighted to be able to talk with Livia because I met her about 18 months, maybe 2 years ago, through that classic 2 degrees of separation we have here in New Zealand from a contact on another sustainable development project I was involved with. Livia loves working with complexity and uncertainty, and she inspires me because she doesn't only talk about this stuff, she's walking the talk herself with her own personal community project underway, which you'll learn more about during our chat. So without further ado, here's my chat with Livia. Livia Hollins, welcome to the Mission Possible podcast. I'm so excited to have you here today. And getting ready for today's chat, just looking back through your experience, even though I know you somewhat, I was blown away again by the depth of your experience in this field. As an international public servant for over 2 decades, you've been busy advancing efforts on climate and sustainable development, and what a big topic that is, and so related to this particular series around natural hazards. You've spent 10 years working at the United Nations Climate Change Agency, and that was all around intergovernmental negotiations and on specific areas of climate change and adaptation and science. So I'm really keen to hear a bit about that experience, knowing that your core focus is around collaboration, and particularly where people have differing views, and those can be quite tense at times. Really keen to dig into that and explore that with you today. And congratulations on being part of the Homeward Bound Global Transformation or Leadership Group with STEM. It's a big honour to be part of a group like that, and we are honoured to have you on the podcast today. Welcome again, Livia.
Thank you so much, Anne. Honestly, it's an absolute delight and a pleasure to speak with you because I've been such a quiet fan of yours for such a long time. So all of the amazing work you've done on collaboration and bringing people together, I'm in complete admiration of what you do. So yeah, it's really a delight to be with you today.
Livia, thank you. That's very kind. We've got so much to talk about. It's almost where do we even begin? But I thought we might start by talking about what practices or beliefs do you think currently dominate thinking in this field? And I've purposely left that a little vague so you can tailor that as you wish around your area's expertise. We all know that paradigms shift very, very slowly. So I'm keen to get your perspective on where we're at the moment. So over to you.
Yeah, no, thank you. A great question to kick off with. I'd just like to take a step back and think about natural hazards to start with, and how we think about natural hazards in this space, and then particularly in the context of the work which I've been involved with in the context of climate change and then climate change adaptation. So the first piece I would like to offer would be a definition really on natural hazards. In the sense that humans have been dealing with natural hazards since the beginning of time. These natural hazards, natural disasters, of course, are difficult for people and communities because they can cause death, they can cause displacement of people, they can damage property, and then they can also have indirect impacts on our economy, the way that our societies function, and reductions in economic activity. And then the thing about climate change is that we have not just a static scenario that we're dealing with in how we respond to these natural disasters and natural hazards, but we have an ongoing changing situation. And so that's where the adaptation piece becomes quite important. So if we look at natural disasters in themselves, they are costing New Zealand millions of dollars each year. And then because of climate change happening on an ongoing basis, that cost is expected to increase. So for instance, if we think of 2023, it was a rough year for New Zealand. The cost of natural disasters was close to $3,810.6 million, which included the Auckland floods, Cyclone Gabrielle, and severe storms. And then the other piece on this is the cost of responding now to climate impacts and natural hazards versus the cost of preparing for the future impacts. And the World Economic Forum have said that for every dollar that we spend now on adaptation action, we are then able to avoid costs of $2 to $10 in the future. So that's just putting that piece on natural hazards into a climate change context. And then coming back to the practices or beliefs that I think have dominated in this field, I'd like to just speak briefly about the UN Climate Change Summit that's taking place as we speak right now in Baku in Azerbaijan. And I'd like to refer to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Chair's opening remarks at that meeting, just to set the scene for us, because I felt that his remarks were quite interesting and appropriate for our conversation today. So he said, I want to focus most of my remarks on the opportunities and indeed the benefits of near-term climate action. But first, we need to focus on urgency. We're very close to the 1.5 degree warming, which is the level that scientists have deemed safe. And indeed, it may be that this level is exceeded already this year in 2024. Beyond the point of 1.5, the risks that are associated with climate change would escalate from what we've called moderate risks, those that are detectable and attributable to climate change, to high risks. That is the risks that are widespread and more severe. And when it comes to what we can do to deal with such risks, there certainly are limits to adaptation and limits to the way that human capacity is able to deal with natural hazards and climate impacts. So I would say, based on that, and coming back to the practices or beliefs, I think humans have tended historically to focus much more on the risk-type thinking space. If we think about more our conversations and on collaboration and the kind of work that you've been involved with, and then riffing off also the sort of new future-focused thinking of the chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we really do need to move from that risk, that scary focus space, much more into the opportunities focus space. And there's various aspects to that opportunities focus space, because dealing with natural hazards, it's complex. There are uncertainties. We're not able to easily map these all out. So we have, for instance, various dichotomies with how we move forward and how we make the most of these kinds of opportunities. And I would say we can consider short-term versus long-term thinking. For instance, how we deal with impacts right now versus how we plan to deal with impacts in the future, and using scenarios and tools there. And then considering things like, what do we invest in locally versus what do we invest in globally? And how can we be strategic for a New Zealand focus, for instance, and what's going to make a difference for us both now and in the future? And then considering for natural hazards, for other types of sectors or issues we're dealing with, it can be quite easy to have a bucket of money that you spend in one particular area, and that then solves the problem. But climate change impacts, natural hazards are not like that, because they are completely cross-cutting. They affect all sectors and all levels. And so we need to consider whether we're taking a siloed approach to how we deal with climate impacts and natural hazards, to how we take a systems approach. So I would say there's a tension there as well. And then one last point I think that's really useful to consider in terms of practices or beliefs in this space is the ability for us to invest resources and time to achieve something in one area, but then consider how there may be multiple benefits of doing that thing for other areas as well as. And I can give you an example. So for instance, when we're talking about dealing with climate impacts, if we are able to understand co-benefits and synergies, and as well as that also the trade-offs, because there may well be trade-offs, then we're able to be strategic in how we make decisions around investment and time spent. For instance, if we invest in energy security and adaptation now, maybe we are then spending less money on mitigation, but in the longer term, when mitigation options may be less expensive, we'll then have a more energy secure, resilient, climate resilient situation that we're in, and we'll be able to achieve the mitigation gains in the future. So those are the kinds of synergies and trade-offs. I think we're just starting to tap into that kind of work now. And there's some really interesting work underway. But so, I mean, that's the sort of practice belief space I think that we're in at the moment.
Livia, thanks for that. An awful lot of things to consider in there, but just pulling some of those threads out for a moment, just this continuous need to deal now in systems and think in systems and act in systems, not just think in that way, but actually act in that way. It's not enabled, I think, by the current ways we operate institutionally, politically, and even socially across our societies. So something there that I think we've got some profound thinking and reshaping to do. Alongside of that, dealing with systems always comes with dealing with paradox, and you've unpacked those as dichotomies or continuous tensions that we need to manage. The conversations seem to revolve around solving problems, and my belief is it's being able to live with the problems more ably. You started off by saying we've dealt with natural hazards as human beings since we were human beings. And now we're just finding new ways to deal with them, and they won't go away. So those problems aren't actually solvable. They're just how we respond to them and how prepared we are to manage them and continue in the sort of lives that we want to have. Bringing that together, some really profound things for us and deep thinking needed at all levels of society and geopolitics, I would suggest, out of your work. So if we I'll pick up the thread, you mentioned that there's some great examples of how we're evolving in this space, and there are good examples around the world where practices are evolving. We've got new approaches being trialled and some successes. I wondered if you could share some thinking around where you've seen some real positive impact coming from adopting new ways of thinking and acting in this space.
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, I completely hear what you're saying. I think considering the systems piece and the uncertainty that we're dealing with, and I think also the relative newness in dealing with these kinds of issues that are complex, I think we need to pay attention to our human nature. And I think naturally for our human psyche, when things are scary and serious and quite confrontational, it can be easy to just move away from those things. We sort of have a fight or flight mechanism that's inbuilt in. That's not really something that's potentially useful in terms of dealing with uncertainty when we know that it's something which we do have to address and deal with. And I think that in this space, there's most certainly a lot of anxiety and concern and worry. We definitely spend time on that, but at the same time, it can be a counter to the kind of space that we need to allow ourselves to be in, which is innovative and calm and rational and forward-thinking and very practical, actually, in terms of not thinking about, indeed, how we got into this situation with climate impacts. We need to be able to think about how we address these, we need to work with what we have and look at what's in front of us. So I really appreciate your consideration of being very practical in this sense. And for humans working in the space of uncertainty, where we are actually constantly learning, we need to be more open to experimentation. And I think that a big part of that also is considering that we need to be also forgiving of ourselves, because we're working right on an edge here. We don't have all the answers. No one actually has all of the answers. And working in these kinds of spaces professionally, it's easy to think I might get it wrong and that's a bad thing. But I really don't believe that's the case. I think we need to allow ourselves to be much more in a space of, this is big and scary, but the way is open, and we need to be very creative here with how we bring all of these different strands together, with how we deal with natural hazards and climate impacts. We need to keep in mind that they are context specific, because even though climate change is a global issue, it has context specific impacts, which would be different in New Zealand as they would be in Europe or in the US, or in Africa or in Asia. This level of context specificity means that we need to be really good at building in processes from the bottom up. And we are starting to see some of that work underway. When I first started with the UN Climate Change Secretariat about 15 years ago, adaptation was just starting to become into a sharper focus. And this in itself, actually, you ask about a practice or approach which has evolved. This focus on climate adaptation in itself was actually quite a dramatic sea change shift, because prior to then, adaptation had been seen as the poor cousin or the excuse for not doing the mitigation. And therefore, developing countries and small island developing states such as our Pacific neighbours, who were intensely struggling already with climate impacts, didn't really receive the recognition of the issue that they deserved at that time. And now we have much clearer way ahead. We've gone from headwinds to tailwinds on adaptation. That's brilliant. And this sea change in thinking is fantastic. So we're now understanding that we need to do adaptation in parallel with how we do the mitigation piece. And we're now understanding also that we need to better understand the synergies and trade-offs and how we can utilize finite resources and act with urgency to achieve both mitigation and adaptation at the same time.
Livia, can I just check in with you? For those who are not so familiar with the terms mitigation and adaptation, they can sound and seem very similar. Would you be able to just give us a quick differentiation between the two before you keep going with those thoughts, just so we're all on the same page with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So mitigation is all about decreasing your greenhouse gas emissions. There's a raft of greenhouse gas emissions, and they're associated with various ways that we live and function in society. And there are lots of different things that we can do to decrease those emissions and therefore mitigate our climate action. So that's an approach to stopping the problem at its source in a nutshell. And then on the adaptation side, what we're saying is that we need to make adjustments in our ecological, our social, cultural, and economic systems in response to some kind of stimulus or effect. So, for instance, we are seeing an increase in climate impacts. They are becoming more frequent and they are becoming stronger. And these types of things disrupt our ways of life. We can decide that these disruptors happen and that we would like to continue with our society and economic systems as they were before, and so we can rebuild in exactly the same way as we set up our systems prior to some natural hazard or climate impact happening. Or we can think, what can we learn here from this climate impact or this natural hazard happening, and how can we change our system our economic situation and processes, and our social things like infrastructure or transport systems or energy systems. How can we change those things so that in the future we are better able to deal with these kinds of severe weather events, whether it's a flood, a storm, a drought? There can be slow onset climate impacts as well. For instance, sea level rise. So that's the point with adaptation, is stepping back and saying, how can we learn from these events? How can we change our systems so that we're better equipped to deal with these things in the future?
Thanks, Livia. I think it's really helpful to have that clarification.
Yeah, I mean, just coming also back to where things are going with how we deal with natural hazards, the practices and approaches that are evolving at the moment. I would say that what we are seeing at the moment is a massive growth in adaptation communities around the world, and that is people working in all different areas, different sectors, different levels. The public sector, the private sector, community groups, iwi Māori in New Zealand, Indigenous groups around the world, starting to look at what they have in front of them and how climate change impacts those things, and then also how they can work together and collaborate. And realizing that with adaptation, there really is no one-size-fits-all approach. Adaptation can range from things like building flood defences, setting up early warning systems for cyclones, switching to drought-resistant crops, redesigning agricultural systems, redesigning communication systems, business operations, government policies, funding and finance arrangements. So there are many nations and communities that are already undertaking this work, but I think that the more important piece is close to our hearts and is the collaboration piece in that space. I think that's definitely an evolving practice and approach at the moment, which is extremely valuable for the ongoing learning needed to work in the adaptation space and be successful in addressing the impacts we see in relation to natural hazards.
Livia, what in your view helps those collaboration efforts to work well? I note that your work at the core of it is enabling that kind of collaboration across groups, and especially those with different and often very conflicting perspectives. And that will always be the case. We all have different needs. You talked about, that's again one of the paradoxes, I call it the self-interest versus collective interest paradigm there. So what in your experience have you seen that would be worth others knowing about? Well, they're leading into this kind of work. What can they learn from that you've already gleaned from your experiences and what you see happening around the world?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I can give you a very personal answer on that, because I have spent 10 plus years being involved with the Intergovernmental Negotiations on climate change, where of course, it's inevitable that countries negotiating in that space will have different views and sometimes quite conflicting views. The climate community decided from the start of the setup of the UN Convention on Climate Change that they would like to work on the basis of consensus. And this is very important in other UN mechanisms and processes. There are voting procedures. But on climate change, the community decided that we should be moving forward together. And in that sense, what it does is force people to bring their divergent views to the table and take the time. And sometimes these things can take a long time. I know, for one, everyone looks at the climate change process and thinks it's another conference. It's been going on forever. Why is it taking so long? But the point is, it's taking so long because we are working collaboratively in a way where we have to listen to each other and allow ourselves time to understand our different contexts and understand how we can find ways to move forward together. And at the same time, there may also be, well, there actually are situations where countries are not able to agree on various natural hazards, climate impact related issues because they affect their trade situation, or they affect their sovereign situation, or they affect cultural values. So it's about understanding those needs and values as well as, and being able to frame them in a way where they are recognised differences, but they're able to be packaged along with other views so that we can collectively move forward on the basis of consensus. And I think that the evolution of the UN climate negotiations in that sense has been quite remarkable, because there are so many different components of that process which reflect the complexity of what we are dealing with on climate change. So you have the mitigation piece, you have the adaptation piece. Under both of those pieces, you've got multiple different strands, which in themselves are complex. As well as that, you have three other general components that we would call means of implementation, and they are the types of things which help countries, whether they're working on adaptation as a climate issue or mitigation, to take actual, tangible, practical implementation action. So they are finance, technology, and capacity building. And innovation, I would say, is also in that space. But all of those pieces are about greasing the wheels and enabling action to move forward. And they are all important. And that level of recognizing we've got divergent views, we're not going to agree about everything, but we can find ways for us all to fit together and play a role and make sure that we are also respected in that space, is really important to be able to implement collective actions together. Personally, I think that they are really valuable lessons learned, and I think that working in consensus, even though it's quite difficult at some times, it can be a very useful approach to actually undertaking real collaboration.
Yeah, Livia, I couldn't agree more. In my experience, which is at a much more localised level than the UN, where we find that if we take the time to get really clear on what matters most to us, whoever us is, and by virtue of doing that, create a new us of the collective that we're dealing with. Although we go slowly to begin with, and quite slowly. One of my clients took 5 years to really stand up a collaboration effort across 2 countries. Once you have that, the actual implementation goes way, way faster. So it's almost like a hockey stick effect. Whereas if we set off in the traditional trajectory, we hit roadblocks really fast and we don't get forward. It was just this morning a message came in from UK where a project hadn't been set up. It was supposed to have delivered in 2 years, didn't take a collaborative approach. 6 years on, they have absolutely achieved nothing and gone nowhere with that project, quite literally. Mm-hmm. And I can't help but wonder if we'd spent a year getting the alignment right, if that might have a different outcome. But unfortunately, you can't rerun history. Yeah, it's really interesting to hear that. So, Livia, knowing that there's a really big part here of actual just humans talking to humans, and humans really understanding that we have all these commonalities and yet very specific contextual drivers. At the heart of it is human connection. And we're surrounded by emerging technologies and methodologies that have such potential to aid us in our human endeavours. Are there any that stand out for you, or even principles from other fields of thinking that you'd like to bring to the fore that, in your view, might be really useful for us to consider, adopt, look at, experiment with, to use your words from earlier?
I could go into picking winners on my favourite adaptation technologies, but I think stepping back from that, what's more useful to consider from my point of view is how the framing of how we find those technologies and how we get them up and running, scale them up, and how we start using them is more important. So from my point of view, some really exciting things at the moment that are underway are setting up ways to operationalize a global goal on adaptation. So when we agreed the Paris Agreement, which was nearly 10 years ago now, countries agreed on an adaptation goal of 3 different components. And they are enhancing adaptive capacity, strengthening resilience, and reducing vulnerability to climate change. And sitting behind these 3 elements is a huge amount of science and also diplomacy, I would say, in considering how we can look at an issue like natural hazards, which are so context-specific and so localized, but how we can think of a way where working together at the global level, we can help each other and bring the framing for the kinds of new technologies and methodologies which you're talking about. Question then is, how do we take these abstract components of this goal, enhancing adaptive capacity, strengthening resilience, reducing vulnerability, how do we take those abstract components and turn them into something which is actually practical and useful? Because at the face of it, they seem very diffuse, these 3 elements. They seem quite hard to relate to, and they seem interesting but a bit difficult to actually apply in a real life sense. And from my point of view, it is really, really useful to understand that all the different pieces we're doing on adaptation and dealing with natural hazards at the local level, they all add up to a bigger piece on we are collectively adapting to climate impacts. And that's why this global aggregate approach is very exciting, I would say. And at the moment, what we can see is the global community, along with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is a vast body of climate scientists. They are currently working on indicators and a methodology to better define these components so that countries are better able to learn from each other when they are taking actions to implement these various adaptation actions in the space of these 3 components. And that's very helpful because when countries are able to say, we're doing these things to decrease our vulnerability, we're doing these things to strengthen resilience, and we're doing these things to enhance our adaptive capacity, they are then able to share the actual tangible technologies that they are using. And these might range from things like AI and early warning systems, things which are very cutting edge type technologies, right through to ecosystem-based adaptation approaches and changing how we grow food and how we set up our food and agricultural systems, through to community-based adaptation, which may be people getting together in groups and understanding their different contexts and learning from each other in a much more localized and practical sense. And there's also a very important component on Indigenous people learning and exchanging in this sense as well. So you see, when we talk about technologies in an adaptation space, we are talking right from high-tech type technologies right through to technologies in the sense of being able to set enabling conditions for people to come together to work out what kinds of solutions are going to be useful for them now and then in the future. The other piece here, I would say, which is really exciting for me personally, is better understanding where you set out a bunch of things that you can do to address natural hazards and adapt to climate change. And then you map out how those things are also going to have multiple benefits in other ways as well. As in, they might make our lives easier, they might make our lives more healthy, they might allow for better outcomes for education, for healthcare, they might allow for better outcomes for agricultural processes and systems, and even for energy security and mitigation as well as. So those things to me are the most exciting types of technologies and methodologies that are being developed at the moment. And I'm talking about things like where you electrify transport systems and you get better gains on air quality, so better gains on health. You invest more in renewable energy and climate adaptation means, and through that you create whole new markets and more jobs for people. You invest in sustainable cities and communities through blue and green infrastructure, and through that you are increasing biodiversity and then also protecting your cities from floods and heat waves. So these kinds of things, and there are tons of these really lovely, I would say, overlaps in values and how we can consider what we then invest and spend our time and money in. So that type of methodology to me is really, really exciting. And these things are moving from a space where they're just diffuse, nice ideas to being much more well-defined so that we can actually then say, we're going to spend our money in this space and that is going to be valuable for multiple different reasons now, but then also in the future, which is super handy when you need to justify investment.
Livia, that's a lovely circle back to where we started the conversation, which is the future focus of our thinking and the shifting towards moving from risk to opportunities type thinking. And I think you painted us a beautiful picture of some of the potential when we do collaborate and we do bring the different perspectives together and we think cross-industry and we think systems, what is actually possible, and we start to see things in a different way. Maybe now's time to mention your own project. You're not just doing this for a job, you're actually living this in real life with trees, I understand.
Yeah, I am. I've spent, as you know, quite some years working on various aspects of taking action on climate change, and it's been a privilege to have a career in this space. But at the same time, it's quite personal to me, and I found it frustrating trying to figure out exactly how we very much tangibly do climate action so that we're not just talking about it and writing nice reports on this sort of thing and having nice events and then going back to our real lives where things are all the same and we are continuing on with business as usual, even though we have a lot of wonderful ideas. So I did the crazy thing of buying a piece of land and setting myself a goal of planting 10,000 trees there. It's a piece of land which was previously dairy farmed, and I'm planning to plant 10,000 native trees there and also restore a river and wetland ecosystem there as well. But I have found it's incredibly difficult. I thought it would be quite straightforward. I was very excited about the whole idea, but nearly 4 years in, I have 500 trees planted. I definitely am a lot more organized now, and I have a nice plan. I have an engaged group of people around me. So
Right.
I'm hoping that in the next 5 years, I'll be able to achieve that. The section is also quite steep. It's certainly marginal land, and I don't think it ever should have been farmed. It's amazing to see, even just removing stock from that space, how the biodiversity is coming back. But yeah, I mean, I really just didn't expect it to be so confronted with it's such hard work, it's expensive, and there's a lot of invasive pests, and it's a lot to deal with. And the psychological weight of that as well as. So I think from my little experiment here, it's a small little contribution, but a really useful sort of spillover type experiment for me to have done personally to really understand this is not easy. We do have to be very forgiving of ourselves, but it is also possible. I hope anyway. Come back to me in 5 years' time and we can check in on where that one's
will.
at.
And I'm trusting my theory, which is we go slow to go faster. So at some point there'll be a tipping point and it will accelerate for you. So Livia, if you could have wave your magic wand for us, either here in New Zealand or in your local area or even globally, what's your one big idea that we might turn it feels like mission impossible, but with collaboration and bringing together all the collective smarts and willingness of everyone that we know and are yet to meet, we could turn it into mission possible. What would that be for you?
Yeah, so I thought long and hard about this. I would love it personally if there was one silver bullet type technology or approach, something really useful for dealing with natural hazards and climate impacts and working in the adaptation space. But actually, it's taken me some years to I think I was in denial for some time, but it's taken me some years to realize, no, we actually have to acknowledge the level of context specificity that we have in dealing with climate impacts and natural hazards. And we have to step back from that idea of really focusing on trying to solve the problem and then it's going to be all awesome, problem will be solved. What we really need in the climate adaptation space, I believe, is more ways to be open with each other and also to get a little bit crazy, I would say. And to me, all of that adds up to innovation. And I think that the moonshot type idea for New Zealand would be some kind of climate adaptation innovation incubator and a network as well as, and keep it really informal, keep it really open. It should be something that's not set up and owned by one particular sector. It should be incorporated through the public sector, with the private sector, with community groups and Indigenous groups also. And it doesn't have to just be a New Zealand focus, this adaptation innovation incubator. It could also be with Australia, with the broader Pacific. There are similar type hubs that I have been a part of, and they apply innovation processes to bring in ideas. Anyone can bring in an idea and then take it through an agile process and look at how it could be scaled up with feedback. It's sort of like a Dragon's Den type thing, with feedback from experts and people who have expertise in various different areas to consider the feasibility of that idea, how it could work, what's needed to support that idea and what's needed to scale it up and get it funded and get it implemented. So, for instance, the UN World Food Programme, they have an innovation accelerator in Munich, which I have been involved with. They have hundreds of ideas every year that they're working on in this space that they're scaling up. And just imagine if we were able to do such a thing here in New Zealand, all of the questions that we have on how we deal with climate risks, natural hazards, impacts right now and then into the future, we could deal with them all. We could have open conversations, be real with each other, and get on with the actual technologies and innovations that are going to help us in this space. And at the same time, we would also allow ourselves room for failing, room for taking a risk and learning and saying, okay, we didn't get that right. We thought it would be great. Wasn't quite what was needed. It didn't work. But that's all good because we've learned something here. And I think that this kind of innovation hub and network would be awesome for New Zealand.
Livia, I couldn't agree more. And I hope all of our listeners who are listening to you will be signing up to help make that happen sometime soon. Your passion for that is evident. And I believe it is a mission possible for the country and actually Oceania and Australasia as a whole. I think it could be an amazing thing to kick off. So I look forward to staying in touch on that particular matter. And it just leaves us to say thank you for being here today. It's been an amazing hour with you. I've enjoyed every moment of it. And I look forward to future conversations and wish you all the best with your moonshot idea.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anne. It's an absolute pleasure. I'll just close by adding in a quick plug for an upcoming UN Adaptation Futures Conference, which is being hosted next year in October in Christchurch. So that's a really exciting one. And honestly, I'd be delighted to co-convene a session together with you on our conversation today,
I would love to.
along with others working in the collaboration space, because, it's an exciting opportunity with bringing the world to New Zealand to help us make progress here.
Absolutely. Well, when we will sign us up for that and we'll make it happen. And today's moonshot from Livia really got me thinking. She was thinking about how could we create a new innovation hub around climate adaptation and sustainable development. So let's jump into old ways, new ways, where we look to the past to inspire us for today. Well, where have we seen hubs before? And I looked back to very ancient times. The Silk Road, which has been known to many of you, was a decentralized network of exchange. And perhaps you might be thinking, yeah, I get the Silk Road. It was about silk and spices and precious metals, maybe ivory and tea. Tea, something very dear to my heart, just as an aside. But it's also a cultural and technology exchange route. Buddhism and other religions passed along that route, Christianity and Islam the same. Also scientific knowledge and innovation. For example, the concept of zero was first developed in India, spread through the Islamic world and into Europe, significantly shaping our Western mathematics of today. Something I didn't know before diving into this. Papermaking was also passed along the route. But perhaps most relevant to our conversation with Livia was the idea of cities as hubs of decentralized interaction. She was really keen that a hub would not have any overhead centralized control, but throughout the Silk Road, cities acted as hubs for trade and the cultural and technological exchange, each with its own independent political structure. The cities were interconnected through trade routes, and these created a decentralized system of interaction. I wonder if we couldn't create the same across our country and across the world to improve all the technology and share all the knowledge around what we're all doing to respond to and adapt to the climate as it changes. What also was key in the Silk Road, which we don't really talk about too much, was the involvement of nomadic peoples, such as the Scythians and the Mongols. They helped facilitate trade and cultural exchanges. They were really crucial to maintaining the flow of goods and acted as intermediaries between settled civilizations. They were instrumental in creating periods of stability, and they really increased the flow of goods because as nomads, they were visiting and sharing their ideas. So who might be the Scythians and the Mongols of our times who helped that knowledge spread? Not just relying on AI and tech to do it, but people talking to people, solving problems for people. So as we can see from the Silk Road example, and really related to where Livia wants to take things, we can create these hubs. Innovation can spread without the necessary central authority that we think is relevant today. It can emerge organically when different communities share common goals and mutual interest. I really hope you've enjoyed the podcast. I'm looking forward to our next episode. We've got another exciting guest coming up for you. I'm Braithwaite. This is Mission Possible. Thanks for listening.